Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome back to the spring campaign in Arkham Horror, the card game. Last week on Sunday, when we did Ice and Death, we picked up 5 experience for the decks. So now we're going to upgrade them along with having some first scenario observations coming out of for each deck. We'll talk about the upgrades that I'm going to make. And then we'll have the tarot reading for the second scenario that'll be taking place tomorrow. So without any further ado, what say we tab into TTS and we'll go through upgrades for the first round of upgrades for the spring campaign. Pay no attention to the Ice and Death setup here. I had to spawn the first scenario so I could get the Chaos Bag and make sure I saved that as an object for the campaign so I can spawn that in between scenarios in TTS. So first up, let's look at Min's deck. The first thing I'll say about Min is I'm actually a lot happy. Of the two decks, I was a lot happier with how Min's deck ran. She was drawing all the cards in the world, and I always had options, and everything ran the way I wanted it to, including drawing her weakness. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, Phoenix Knight, that's a bad thing. Well, when you draw that many cards in the course of a scenario, you're going to end up drawing her weakness inevitably. So you just have to kind of bear in mind that. So basically you go through evaluating that, at least I am with Min, on was I able to deal with the weakness when it came up. Fortunately, I had enough icons in my hand that I was able to use a lore test and be able to deal with that test. Because the problem is Min's weakness just turns her signature asset completely off. So as a recollection, let me pull them both out of the deck here. And here we go. So if we look at Analytical Mind again, we'll zoom in on that. We see that we can commit 1 card to each skill test performed by an investigator at another location. And as a fast action, after you commit exactly 1 card to a skill test, exhaust Analytical Mind to draw 1 card. But when we look at the King in Yellow, we see that we can't commit exactly 1 or 2 cards to a skill test. So that turns, let me close that out. And I'll move myself over just a little bit. We'll put myself, I'm going to be kind of in the way either way, so I'll just leave myself right where I was. But coming back to the King in Yellow, we see that I can't commit 1 or 2 cards. I can't commit 1 or 2 cards to a skill test, so that turns Analytical Mind completely off for Min, which means now I can't commit, which basically just means I can't commit to anything outside of, not only can I not commit to another investigator in another location, I can't commit to another investigator, period, because I can only commit 1 card to another investigator. So if I have the King in Yellow out, it turns Analytical Mind, it basically turns Min off completely from being support. So hopefully that ramble makes sense there. But where I'm going with this is I was able to get enough icons to be able to deal with the King in Yellow because I drew that later in the scenario. If I'd drawn it earlier, I might have had a harder time dealing with it. So that ramble aside, let's actually go in and talk about the upgrades that Min's making. I'm making a very standard Seeker upgrade, a very standard pair of Seeker upgrades, at least for me. I'm taking deductions from level 0 to level 2. So what we gain on the upgrade is we gain another lore icon from deduction level 0, and the ability to discover 2 additional clues at the location if we succeed by 2 or more. I'm taking both of our deductions up to level 2. In order to explain the 5th upgrade and why I'm doing that, I'm actually going to save this upgrade sheet as well. Just so I don't forget later. In order to explain this last upgrade, I need to explain a concept that if you've been playing Arkham Horror, the card game, for a while, you are familiar with, so I will apologize in advance for the insult to the intelligence. But in case I have anybody who's new to Arkham Horror, the card game, this is a term you may not have heard thrown at you. When we talk about a term known as slot pressure, what that means is a reflection that the investigators are also human beings. In order to illustrate that, let's take a real life example. So as you can see, I've got 2 hands, right? Say I'm holding a stapler and a bottle. Now say I see a PS5 controller down here, and I want to start holding that all of a sudden. What I have to do is I have to set either the stapler or the bottle down, and now here, look at that, I'm holding a PS5 controller. Similarly, if I want to take a drink out of my drink bottle, I have to put the stapler down, and now I'm holding a bottle, and I'm holding my drink bottle and my PS5 controller. Slot pressure in Arkham Horror, the card game, works exactly the same way. The simplest example of that is, again, you've got your two hands, one ally, one tarot, one body slot, and two arcane slots, I believe. Yes. So hopefully that ramble made sense on what slot pressure is when we talk about that. The reason I'm talking about slot pressure is to hopefully make sense of what I'm doing with the Raven Quill. So as you can see here, I've taken the check mark next to Spectral Binding, which means attached asset does not take up any slots. So when I go play the Raven Quill, let me go ahead and search that out. So if I'm able to play the Raven Quill when I purchase it, which I did on upgrade, name a tome or spell asset and record that card on its upgrade sheet attached to the named asset. And I named Occult Lexicon when I did that. When I resign or the game ends, either mark a checkbox on the Raven Quill's upgrade sheet or reduce the experience cost to upgrade the attached asset before the next scenario by 1, which will be very handy either way with the Occult Lexicon. Because when the King in Yellow comes out, you can see that it takes up a hand slot, which means if I already have two tomes if I already have two hand slots taken, I would need to discard something to put the King in Yellow out in play. Unfortunately, I do have to put the King in Yellow in play. There's no option around that. So by taking Spectral Binding on the Raven Quill, I'm theoretically protecting the Occult Lexicon from that slot pressure. I won't need the Living Quill as much, and I can potentially name two more tome or spell assets that I might want to protect from that. But hopefully that all made sense with it. That's it for Min's upgrades. Now let's move over to Mark. Mark I was a little bit less happy with, but I think some of that was not realizing how Sophie actually works, where you put the damage on Mark to activate Sophie. So with that in mind, Mark's going to be taking a lot of damage, so I do want to guard against that. The first two experience are taking a standard Guardian upgrade. I'm taking one of his Vicious Blows up to level 2. It's the same thing as Deduction, just for damage. So instead of discovering an additional clue, you deal additional damage. That's all that is. Normally, at this point, I would upgrade both Vicious Blows. But because I sense Mark's going to be taking a lot of damage, I decided instead to upgrade his Hallowed Mirror to level 3. So now what we gain is when we play a Soothing Melody, we either change each 2 on it to a 3, or shuffle it into the deck instead of discarding it. Everything else is exactly the same, where the Hallowed Mirror itself takes up the accessory slot, and I still have horrific French pronunciation on Soothing Melody. But we're not going to get into that now. As far as observations coming out of the first scenario with Mark, I was a little bit less happy with Mark than I was with Min. Not to the point of totally wanting to Akachi Mark's deck, but definitely would want to build it a little bit differently now that I see more of how the tactical cards, how some of the tactic cards work. Like I said, I'm not wanting to Akachi the deck completely, but some changes I'd want to make. Now, for those of you who are wondering, Phoenix Knight, I have never heard the term Akachiing a deck before. Let me explain what Akachiing a deck means. So, if you were around for the winter campaign in 2024, I think it was last year's winter campaign when I did the Innsmouth Conspiracy. My clover was Akachi Onyeli, and I came out of that first scenario wanting to completely blow the deck up and start over from scratch. So that's basically what that means, is if I come out of the first scenario wanting to completely blow up a deck and start over from scratch, that's what it means to Akachi a deck. So a very unofficial term in the lexicon and lore of Phoenix Knight. So Just a little random tidbit. But we're rambling a little bit there. So let's move on to the tarot reading for tomorrow's scenario. We'll give the tarot deck a shuffle. Okay, I think we're good there, and we've got our 2 cards here. So let's look at our cards. First up, we've got the Chariot 7. Each investigator begins the game with 2 additional cards in their opening hand, or each investigator begins the game with 2 fewer cards in opening hand, and can't draw cards during their first turn. So there'd be no real way to fix a mulligan there. Is that one of our cards last week? No. Here we've got the Star 17. After an investigator reveals an Elder Sign token during a skill test, they may heal 1 damage or 1 horror. After an investigator reveals a Tentacle token, they must take either 1 or 1. So 2 additional cards in hand, and after a Tentacle, take 1 or 1. Or heal an Elder Sign on 1, or heal 1 or 1 on an Elder Sign, and 2 fewer cards, and can't draw cards on the first turn. I think here I'm going to flip the Star 17. So we get the good effect of the Chariot 7. Plus 2 cards in opening hand. And the bad is the Star 17. Okay, just got everything noted on my sheet where I'm keeping track of tarot readings, Tekalili, all that fun stuff. So that will do it for this first round of upgrades. We'll see how I do with how happy I am with Mark coming out of the first scenario, or out of the second scenario, before I decide if the campaign is going to continue. It probably will, but don't hold me to that at this point. Still got a lot coming up on the channel, so I've got one more product. I'm calling it an unboxing, but it's more of an inventorying, because I've got one more game that came in from Jester that I want to inventory everything that I've got with it. So we're going to do that later tonight. Tomorrow, we're continuing the spring campaign with the second scenario to the Forbidden Peaks. Wednesday, we're playing Welcome To from Blue Cocker Games, building up a suburb. And next week, Mystical Munchies will continue out of the Can You Take the Heat cookbook with the entree, Stone Cold's Texas Toast. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care, everyone.